because our business is Africa. Now, Kenya has played host to numerous heads of state and foreign diplomats in the recent past. Kenya seems to be a darling these coming few months after President William Ruto took over leadership of the country. Now, today we discuss trades that is between Kenya is having with other countries. With me in studio is Dr. Daniel Achach, an international trade lawyer. Welcome to the set, sir. And let's just dive deep and straight into that now. Kenya and its international investment conference that happened in the country just the other day, what does this mean for Kenya?
Okay, good afternoon viewers, and thank you for having me for this discussion. So the whole of this week, from Monday, there's been an international investment conference that Kenya has hosted. You see, basically, the International Investment Conference is supposed to advertise Kenya to the outside world, basically inviting investors, showcasing what Kenya has, and inviting potential investors in terms of what they can then come in and invest. And also, it's an idea to really open up markets for our products beyond the borders. So the whole essence of trade agreements, international trade agreements, and the reason why you see a lot of activity, the head of state hosting this, hosting that from different states, in the context of trade agreement is basically to open up spaces, open markets for what we produce, and also, just open our own market so that we then invite investments into the country.
And this is something that is coming just after the president has been abroad and locally has also had different guests visit the country. And now let's just talk about the trade agreements between Kenya and other countries. We know Kenya has agreement with the US. There is recently the Foreign Affairs Cabinet Secretary Mutua was in Canada. He's been all over the place. Just what are these agreements that you're getting into, and how are we likely to benefit? And also, are we likely looking at a situation where we look at our previous agreements with them so that we say that Kenya is benefiting? Because talk out there is the Western world benefits more than Kenyans benefit.
Now, there's a lot happening in terms of negotiation of trade agreements. Actually, there are a lot of agreements being negotiated parallel to each other. And what happens is that when a country negotiates a trade agreement with each other, you're basically saying that I have products that I produce within my country, and I'm asking that you open up your market so that my products are able to access yours. And it's a give and take. I open mine, you open yours. So as we look for those markets, the other implication is that we are also opening up Kenya for competition, because then we have products coming up from those other countries to our country. Now, there's a lot happening. If we are to talk about the Kenya-US trade relations, as you may be aware, Kenya has been trading with the US under the AGOA system, which is bound to end in 2025. And so there has been a discussion as to what happens after this. And so Kenya has basically entered into negotiations with the US, what we call a reciprocal kind of arrangement, where then Kenya is supposed to open up its market to the US, and then the US will open up its market. And in such negotiations, whether it's with the US, whether it's with the EU, with the UK, when a country, especially a small country like Kenya, is negotiating with a giant country, like the US or the EU, it becomes very complicated, because there are instances where, I'll give you an example. If Kenya negotiates with the US on agricultural products, for instance, and the US says, we've opened up the market for your agricultural products, you can bring them in. Then comes in the other issues of standards. Are the Kenyan products able to meet the standards that are set by the US market? Comes in the questions of what we call the SPS, the sanitary and phytosanitary measures. So that they'll tell you, we've opened up, you can bring your fish to our market. But then when you go there, then there are regulations. Your fish must have been raised under these standards. It must meet these standards. It must be of this size. And so what happens, what we've experienced under AGOA, for example, is that we were given an open market, like given a basket. You're told, put in your goods. But then you realize not many of your goods can actually fit in that basket. And so it has been especially when you have a reciprocal arrangement, in most instances, it's the developed country that benefits. And that has been the concern for especially the least developed countries. So that when Kenya negotiates these agreements, it's a question of how Kenya then takes care of its interests. Which particular products do we really want to get into those markets? And therefore, how do we frame these agreements? Because you see, you can frame a trade agreement in a manner that even requires the other party to support you to meet those standards. Yes. So it's a question of how, at the end of the day, the trade agreements are fashioned.
But you see, Daktari, even as we talk about standards out there, there are some products that that we import into this country that even where it's coming from, they don't consume that. So then how do we, whilst they talk about standards that we take to them, what are our standards, or is Kenya just anywhere where we can dump everything just because it's coming from the outside and the West, to be specific?
Okay.
I'll give you an example, because if you talk to women out there, they will tell you there are some sanitary towels that when they buy them, they go to buy them, it is of lesser quality than what is being sold in retail shops in the United States. So then how do we talk about standards when we know we're getting the short hand of the stick?
Yeah, when you talk about standards, I can tell you from here that Kenya has one of the most progressive standards in the world. Actually, our standards largely conform with the international standards. When it comes, what you're speaking to is a question of enforcement. It's a weakness in our enforcement system. Because what happens is this: we have international agreements on standards. Actually, Kenya is a member of the World Trade Organization, the WTO, and WTO sets minimum standards when it comes to products that are being sold. So then it's upon the country to develop systems of enforcing these standards. If you go to our Kenya Bureau of Standards, you'll be surprised. We have very high standards set for products coming into this country. But you see, the moment you start having loopholes, I mean, we have a lot of problems with counterfeit goods being sold in this country. It's a question of enforcement. I think as a country, we really need to have a lot of work on enforcement. And when you're talking about that, at the end of the day, when you are letting, goods that are substandard into your country, what does it mean in trade terms? It means that because these goods are coming to compete, assuming you have local producers of similar products, then it means you are killing your own industry. By killing your own industry, you are killing employment. When you're killing employment, you're reducing the number of people you can tax. And so it has all this effect on the economy at the end of the day.
I think maybe if we sealed all these taxes, then the finance bill 2023 would not be there. But let's talk about the trade wars that we've been having. I remember years back there was pretty much a trade war between Kenya and Tanzania. I remember even our chicken, I think, were burnt in Tanzania. And as a result, also, we see that there are some products that were burnt from Uganda and all that. As with the new talk about a united Africa, borderless Africa, how are we likely to improve on the problems that we've had for a very long time within the East Africa community?
Okay, for the what you're calling the trade wars, there has been a bit of tension between Kenya and actually not just Kenya and Tanzania, even Kenya and Uganda regarding I think milk.
Milk, yes.
And same thing with the eggs. You remember when they were telling us that the chicken we are refusing to take actually ours because the eggs came from Kenya, something like that. So when we're talking about Africa, essentially, Africa does not trade with itself. If you look at trade statistics, we trade with people outside Africa, especially the West. And some of the reasons that have been advanced, the reason why Africa does not trade with itself, is that we lack that trust. We don't trust each other. And so a lot of what you see happening between Kenya and Tanzania, Kenya and Uganda, are actually issues of trust. Otherwise, within the East African, actually in the continent, the East African community is one of the most progressive regional formations, in the entire continent. The negotiations that are happening now at the African Continental Free Trade Area are being done on the basis of these regional blocks. And so the problems you see sometimes between these countries, especially the neighboring countries, are questions of, lack of political goodwill, and also taking up obligations. Kenya and Tanzania belong to what we call a customs union. When you are in a customs union, it means that you are one market. So legally speaking, if a product comes from the US to Kenya, it is assumed that it has also entered Uganda, it has entered Tanzania, because we are in one customs union. And so we should not even be having problems. Even when it comes to movement of people, because ideally when you are in a common market, there is what we call free movement of people. So that today I'm a lawyer in Kenya, under the ideal common market, I should be able to go and set up my law firm in Tanzania. But you see, the problem we have in Africa, actually the entire continent, is that sometimes we sign into these laws, but then when it comes to implementation, we do not implement them. And there's a big, big problem when it comes, especially to the movement of people from one place to another. Because you tell me that you've allowed my products to, my chicken can come into Tanzania, but myself, I cannot cross the border. You know, it doesn't make sense at all. It's a real problem that we have in Africa. And even at the negotiations, if you realize when this African Continental Free Trade Protocol was signed, the agreement itself was signed, alongside it was signed the protocol on free movement of people in Africa. Our heads of state in Africa were very quick to sign and ratify the trade agreement. The one on free trade, free movement of people, not many countries have ratified it. I think about only 3 or 4. The one on, the agreement, the main agreement has about 54 ratifications. Only one is missing. So that really tells you that we have this mistrust amongst ourselves as Africans, which we really must deal with if we want to trade with